gave up her spot at the military district hospital for Wendy. That voice pierced my eardrums like a sharp knife. I trembled all over. The blinding white light in front of my eyes gradually faded, and my vision focused on a face that was both familiar and unfamiliar. Luke Carter stood there, dressed sharply in his military uniform. Beneath his thick eyebrows, his eyes, always holding a trace of impatience, looked down at me with cold authority. The sunlight streamed from behind him, casting shadows across his chiseled features, making him look even more severe. My breath caught for a moment, and my fingers instinctively dug into my palm. The pain confirmed this wasn't a dream. I had been reborn. Back to 1983. Back to that afternoon that changed the course of my life. Back to the day Luke Carter proposed to me. "Wendy needs this opportunity more than you do," he said, his voice so calm it felt almost cruel. "Your parents are both workers. You can always try again, but she can't. This is her one and only chance." Not a word was different. It was exactly what he said in my past life. A sharp pain twisted in my stomach as memories surged like a tidal wave. In my previous life, right here in this courtyard, I had been secretly in love with him for 3 years. When I heard he was willing to marry me, I was overjoyed and lost all sense of reason. Without hesitation, I gave up my placement at the military district hospital for his beloved sister, Wendy Lynn. I thought that was the beginning of love. I didn't realize it was the start of a nightmare. "What are you smiling so foolishly about?" Luke waved his hand in front of my face. I suddenly grabbed his wrist. The warmth and the strong pulse under my fingers felt real. This wasn't an illusion. I had really come back, 30 years into the past. "Let go," he said coldly, a flicker of disgust in his eyes. He yanked his hand back and instinctively wiped it on the seam of his pants, as if I were something dirty. That subtle gesture pricked my heart like a needle. How could I not have seen it in my past life? How had I been so blinded by love that I didn't even notice such obvious disdain? "Didn't your parents ever teach you that girls should be reserved?" he mocked. "But I guess someone who offers to trade a job for marriage probably doesn't have much dignity to begin with." I stared at him intensely, the memories in my mind overlapping with the present moment. Yes, in my past life, I really did say those pathetic words. "As long as you marry me, I'll give the spot to Wendy Lynn." Back then, I believed it was a noble sacrifice for love. Now, I know it was a trap they set. "Luke Carter," I said, my voice unexpectedly calm, "do you really think I can't live without you?" He was clearly stunned for a moment, his brows furrowing even more. "What do you mean?" I slowly curved my lips into a smile, one he would never be able to understand. "I mean," I suddenly raised my hand and slashed it across his face with all my strength. Caught off guard, 3 bloody scratches appeared instantly on his cheek. He staggered back 2 steps and slammed into the pomegranate tree behind him. A few bright red petals fluttered down, landing on his shoulder, like they were spelling my name. "Emily Shen, are you crazy?" he shouted, holding his face and staring at me in disbelief. I shook out my tingling fingers and sneered. "That's for what you owed me in our last life." "Last life? What the hell are you talking about?" His shock quickly turned into suspicion. He scanned me up and down as if I were some lunatic. I stepped forward. He actually stepped back, his back pressed tight against the tree trunk. This man, nicknamed the Iron Reaper on the battlefield, was actually afraid of me. "How interesting, Luke Carter," I said, every word like a knife between clenched teeth. "Not only will I never give that hospital spot to Wendy Lynn, but I'll make sure you and your precious little sister never recover in this lifetime." His expression shifted from stunned to grim. "Do you even know what you're saying?" "Of course I do." I bent down and picked up a fallen pomegranate blossom from the ground. I crushed it between my fingertips. The bright red leaves and petals stained my hand like blood, just like the way I knew how you and Wendy Lynn got married behind my back, had a child, and later framed me with a charge for sabotaging a military marriage, sending me straight to prison. His pupils contracted sharply. "What are you talking about?" "Let it blow with the wind," I said with a light, cold chuckle. I wiped my blood-stained fingers against the clean front of his uniform. "Fine. Just think I've gone mad, but remember, mad women don't care about consequences." With that, I turned and walked away. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest, my palms soaked in cold sweat, but my steps were firm and unyielding. Emily Shen! You stop right there. Luke roared behind me. I waved a hand without looking back. Save it, Luke Carter. I've grown tired of your games. As I pushed open the courtyard gate, I caught a glimpse of him from the corner of my eye, still standing there, disbelief written all over his face. The 3 bloody scratches on his handsome features stood out starkly. The sunlight suddenly felt blinding. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The air of 1983. No musty prison walls, no smell of antiseptic from the hospital, just the fresh scent of early summer grass and leaves. I was really back. Back before the tragedies began. Back to the turning point where I still had the power to rewrite my fate. I looked down at my own hands. Fair, smooth, not yet roughened by years of housework, not yet calloused from years behind bars. These hands could still hold a scalpel, could still save lives, and could still seek revenge. Emily, why are you daydreaming under the sun? My mother's voice called from behind me. I turned around suddenly and saw her standing beneath the eaves, holding a tray of beans. The sunlight painted a soft golden glow around her. My throat tightened, my eyes burned with heat. In my past life, because I had insisted on marrying Luke Carter, I nearly severed all ties with my parents. It wasn't until they passed away that I learned they had always quietly followed my news, even leaving me all their savings. And I never even got to see them one last time. Mom, my voice choked. I rushed forward and hugged her tightly. Oh goodness, what's gotten into you, child? She said, caught off guard by my sudden embrace. The beans spilled and scattered all over the ground. Did that Luke Carter boy upset you again? I shook my head and buried my face in her shoulder, greedily breathing in the familiar scent of soap clinging to her clothes. It was only in this moment that I truly understood what a precious gift this second chance at life was. Not just for revenge, but to make up for all my regrets. It's nothing. I just missed you. I said softly as I let her go and bent down to help pick up the beans. Where's Dad? I asked. He went to school. He'll be back tonight, she replied. Then she looked at me closely. Are you sure you're all right? I thought I heard you arguing with Luke Carter just now. I paused, then casually resumed gathering the beans. It's nothing. I just turned down his proposal. What? My mother gasped, almost dropping the glass bowl. You turned him down? But you've always... That was before, I interrupted gently. I looked up at her with a firm smile. I've changed my mind. He and I aren't right for each other. She stared at me for a long moment, then suddenly reached out to touch my forehead. You don't have a fever. I couldn't help but laugh through the tears and pulled her hand away. Mom, I'm serious. I want to focus on my career. I'm not thinking about marriage right now, especially not with that scumbag. She looked like she still wanted to say something when the courtyard gate creaked open again. A girl in a white dress peeked her head in hesitantly. Aunt Shen, is Emily home? Wendy Lin. My fingers curled unconsciously. A few beans were crushed in my palm. This was the same harmless-looking face that in my previous life had stolen my job, my marriage, and my entire life. She was even more delicate than I remembered, her tiny face barely the size of a palm, with big watery eyes and skin so pale it was almost translucent. The whole person looked like a fragile white flower swaying in the wind, the kind of girl who could make anyone feel protective just by existing. But I knew all too well what kind of venomous heart hid beneath that pitiful, innocent appearance. Wendy, come in, my mother called out warmly and waved her over. Then she turned to me and gave me a look, clearly signaling me to behave. You two talk. I'll go start lunch. I stared coldly as Wendy Lin walked toward me with dainty, cautious steps. The hem of her dress swayed gently with her movements like a blooming lotus. In my previous life, it was this exact image that deceived me. I really believed she was just some sweet, innocent adopted sister. Emily, she said softly, her voice as light as a whisper, I heard you and Luke had a fight. News sure traveled fast. I raised an eyebrow. Did he go crying to you? No, of course not, she rushed to deny, her eyes quickly turning red. I just happened to be walking by and heard your voices. Luke, he was really upset. I almost burst out laughing. That cold-blooded man? Upset? He only ever showed emotion when things didn't go his way. Anger, not sadness. So, I crossed my arms, staring at her. You're here to talk me into giving him what he wants? She bit her lower lip, tears hanging on her lashes, threatening to fall but never quite dropping. I just don't want you two to fight because of me. I don't want the hospital placement anymore. How clever, taking a step back to gain ground. That was exactly how she got me in the last life. Her self-sacrificing act made me feel so guilty that I gave her the opportunity willingly. Great, I said casually, then don't take it. She was clearly stunned. Even the tears forgot to fall. She hadn't expected me to agree so easily. Anything else? I turned around to leave. Wait, she quickly grabbed my sleeve. Emily, I think you've misunderstood something. Luke and I are really just like brother and sister. I sharply shook off her hand. Don't touch me. She stumbled back a step and fell to the ground. This time, the tears finally dropped. Emily, what are you doing? My mother's voice rang out from the kitchen. She rushed over and immediately helped Wendy up. Wendy, are you okay? I'm fine, Wendy said between sobs. It was my fault. I lost my balance. I watched coldly as she played out the exact same performance. This was how she made everyone believe I was the jealous, bitter woman who bullied her out of pure malice. Emily, how could you push her like that? My mother scolded, glaring at me. I didn't push her, I replied calmly. She fell on her own. No, really, Auntie Shen, it was me. I wasn't standing steady, Wendy said in her best helpless tone. But when my mother wasn't looking, she flashed me a smug, taunting smile. Of course, a dog can't stop itself from eating dirt. Mom, I'm going to the hospital, I said, too tired to watch any more of her little show. I turned and went inside to grab my bag. Wait, Wendy suddenly called after me. Emily, tomorrow is the last day to submit the transfer application. So that was it. After all the performance and pretense, she was still aiming for that hospital placement. I turned back to meet her expectant gaze and slowly smiled. Don't worry, I'll submit it on time. Her eyes lit up. In my own name, I added, enunciating every word slowly, clearly. The color drained from her face immediately. As I walked out the courtyard gate, I could still hear her fake sobs and my mother's voice trying to comfort her. But this time, I wouldn't be fooled by appearances again. This time, I would personally tear off their masks. I would make them feel every bit of pain they'd put me through in the last life. Luke Carter. Wendy Lynn. Are you ready? The game has only just begun. Morning sunlight poured through the glass windows of the hospital. I pushed open the doors of First People's Hospital. The familiar scent of disinfectant rushed to greet me. This place, once where I'd found purpose and later heartbreak, stood before me again. And this time, my fingertips trembled just a little. I heard Dr. Shen only got the spot at the military district hospital because of her connections. Isn't that the truth? Her parents are both high-ranking officials. Not like Dr. Lin, she earned everything on her own. Around the corner, two nurses were huddled together, whispering. I stopped in my tracks and leaned casually against the wall. A cold smile tugged at the corner of my lips. So, Wendy Lin had moved faster than I expected. The weekend had barely ended, and the rumors had already spread throughout the hospital. I straightened the collar of my white coat and deliberately let my footsteps echo as I walked toward them. The moment the two nurses saw me, their faces turned ghostly pale, like they'd seen a ghost. Morning, Nurse Zhang. Nurse Wang. I greeted them cheerfully with a bright smile. What were you talking about? Sounds like such a fun conversation. Nothing, Nurse Zhang stammered, nearly dropping the patient chart in her hand. We were just discussing the round schedule for today, Nurse Wang added quickly, eyes darting away nervously. I nodded slowly, the smile still on my face, only sharper. Really? That's funny. I could have sworn I heard something about the military district hospital placement. Their faces turned an even uglier shade. Tiny beads of sweat began forming on their foreheads. Just as the silence grew so thick it was suffocating, a soft voice drifted from the far end of the corridor. Good morning, Emily. I turned my head and saw Wendy Lin walking toward us in a pristine white doctor's coat. Her long black hair rested smoothly on her shoulders, and she was holding a tray of patient charts. The morning sunlight wrapped her in a soft glow, making her look pure and harmless. Nurse Zhang, Nurse Wang, she greeted gently, and the two nurses practically leapt to her side, hiding behind her like she was their savior. Wendy turned to me with a sweet, gentle smile. Emily, don't be upset. They were just talking nonsense. I stared straight into those seemingly innocent, wide eyes and suddenly raised my voice. Dr. Lin, since you care so much about my placement, why don't we have a little competition? My voice rang crystal clear through the quiet corridor, catching the attention of several passing doctors and nurses. They all stopped and turned to look. Wendy's smile stiffened. Compete? How? I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. She instinctively stepped back until her back hit the wall. Next surgery, I said. Let's see who performs better. You could have heard a pin drop. Wendy's face turned ghost white. Her fingers clenched around the chart, her knuckles going pale. I don't understand what you mean, she said, her voice starting to tremble. It's simple, I said, sweeping my gaze around to make sure everyone could hear clearly. The next patient that requires surgery, you and I will each perform one. Let the entire hospital evaluate who is more qualified for the military district hospital position. Wendy's lips quivered. Her eyes darted around in panic, avoiding mine. I knew her too well. In the previous life, she rode into the military district hospital on the back of my opportunity. Her first independent surgery ended in a disaster that nearly killed a patient. She was demoted to a nurse afterward. What's wrong? Scared? I taunted deliberately. Or are you just not confident in your skills? Whispers spread through the crowd. Some doctors exchanged meaningful glances. Wendy's face flushed red, then turned pale again. Finally, she squeezed out a response. This isn't appropriate. Surgery isn't a game. Exactly, I cut her off coldly, which is why only the capable should be allowed to do it. Don't you agree, Dr. Lin? You're absolutely right. A deep male voice interrupted, and both of us turned. Standing not far away was Director Han Zhenghong, hands clasped behind his back, his brows furrowed. My heart skipped a beat. In my previous life, this was the man who once recognized my potential. But after I was rejected from the transfer, he grew cold toward me, eventually turning a blind eye when I was removed from my position as a surgeon. Director Han. Wendy's eyes lit up like she'd found a lifeline. Her eyes instantly turned red. I'm worried this would put the patient at risk. But Director Han ignored her performance completely. He looked at me with a serious expression. Dr. Shen, he said sternly, are you sure you want to do this? I'm sure, I said, standing tall and meeting Director Han's eyes without flinching. I believe fair competition is the only way to truly be responsible to our patients. Director Han paused, thoughtful. Then suddenly, he nodded. All right, there's an appendectomy scheduled for this afternoon. You'll each take one case. I'll personally supervise. Wendy Lin's face went paper white. Director, I have clinic appointments this afternoon, she said quickly. Those can be rescheduled, he replied without hesitation. His tone was final. It's settled. Dr. Shen will use operating room 3. Dr. Lin will use operating room 5. Surgery starts at 2 p.m. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Wendy standing there, clearly shaken, barely able to stay on her feet. I stepped closer and lowered my voice near her ear. What's wrong? Scared? It's not too late to take back those rumors. She snapped her head up, and for just a flash, I caught a glint of resentment I knew all too well. But it vanished almost instantly, replaced by her usual fragile innocence. Emily, she whispered, voice trembling, why are you doing this to me? Why? I gave a soft, cold laugh. Because I'm sick of people climbing the ladder with lies and fake tears. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked toward the doctor's lounge. Behind me, I heard the hurried click of Wendy's footsteps. No doubt she was running off to find Luke Carter for help. Sure enough, less than 30 minutes later, Luke stormed into the lounge, still bearing the scratches on his face from this morning. A few doctors who had been working on patient notes quickly found excuses to slip away. Emily Shen, he barked, grabbing my wrist with such force that I winced. What the hell do you think you're doing? Why are you putting Wendy through this? I yanked my hand away hard. Officer Carter, this is a hospital. Watch your behavior. Don't give me that crap, he growled, voice low with fury. You need to go to Director Han right now and call off this ridiculous competition. Wendy just got officially certified. She's not ready for this. Not ready for what? I cut him off. For exposing the fact that she doesn't even know how to perform surgery? Luke's expression darkened. That's nonsense. Is it? I said coolly. We'll all see for ourselves this afternoon. I brushed past him, grabbing my patient chart to begin rounds. Now if you'll excuse me, don't get in the way of my work, Officer Carter. He stood frozen behind me, his face shifting through stormy emotions before he finally ground out, Emily Shen, you'll regret this. As I watched him storm off, I let out a long breath. That was when I realized my palms were drenched in cold sweat. But oddly enough, alongside the nerves, I felt something I hadn't in years: excitement. Finally, I had the chance to rip their masks off with my own hands. At 1:45 p.m., I stood outside operating room 3, making final preparations. Nurses bustled in and out. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air. I heard Dr. Lin's patient changed at the last minute, Nurse Zhang whispered to me. It was supposed to be a simple appendectomy, but now they switched it to a complicated case. I paused mid-motion. Who approved that? I think Officer Carter pulled some strings, she said quietly. I gave a cold smile. Of course. Luke Carter was determined to make Wendy shine, so they handed her the easy case. And as for me? What about our patient? I asked. Nurse Zhang's expression turned uneasy. It's an elderly patient with a history of heart disease. The appendix has already ruptured. It's risky. I nodded. I could already see what they were trying to do. Force me to back down or push me into a surgery with extremely high risk. If anything went wrong, I'd not only lose the placement, I might destroy my career altogether. Prep for surgery, I said calmly. I put on my mask and gloves. At exactly 2 p.m., I stood at the operating table, looking down at the anesthetized patient in front of me. The patient was a man in his 60s, his complexion gray and lifeless. The numbers on the monitor didn't look promising. Blood pressure is 90/60, heart rate at 110, the anesthesiologist reported, concern in his voice. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a moment, mentally running through the entire procedure. In my previous life, during those endless days in prison, I had imagined countless times what it felt like to hold a scalpel again. And now, here I was, finally back in this place. The moment the cold metal touched my fingertips, a strange calm washed over me. The sensation of slicing through skin, the delicate sound of tissues separating, it all felt so familiar, like I had never left. Halfway through the surgery, a nurse suddenly rushed in, clearly panicked. Dr. Shen, something's happened in operating room 5. I kept my hand steady on the retractor, didn't even glance up. What is it? Dr. Lin. She nicked the patient's intestine. There's massive arterial bleeding. Director Han asked if you could assist. The room fell silent. Everyone's eyes turned to me. I continued with the operation, my tone level. I can't leave my patient right now. Tell Director Han. I trust he can handle it. The nurse hesitated, but eventually turned and ran out. I focused all my attention on the operation in front of me, tuning out the noise, the pressure, the chaos beyond the room. 2 hours later, after the final stitch was tied and the monitor stabilized, I finally let out a long breath. Surgery successful, I announced, exhaustion settling in as I pulled off my mask. Still, there was a deep sense of fulfillment in my chest. As I stepped out of the OR, I came face to face with Director Han, who looked grim, and Luke Carter, whose expression was frantic. The scratches on his face were still clearly visible. Dr. Shen, Director Han said sternly, Dr. Lin's surgery didn't go well. The patient's condition is critical. We need you to assist immediately. I looked down at my blood-stained scrubs, then met Luke Carter's pleading eyes. I slowly shook my head. Sorry, Director. I just finished a high-risk surgery. I need to rest, I said calmly. Besides, I'm just a military officer's daughter. I'm sure Dr. Lin is more than capable, isn't she? Luke's expression twisted with rage. He stepped forward as if to grab me again, but Director Han blocked him. Emily Shen, that's a human life, he roared. So? I shot back coldly. Why didn't any of you think about that when you assigned me the high-risk case? Where was that concern when you deliberately increased my risk? Director Han's eyes widened in disbelief as he turned to Luke. You switched the patient? Luke opened his mouth, but no words came out. The fury in his eyes slowly gave way to panic. Just then, a nurse came running, tears streaming down her face. Director, the patient in OR 5, they didn't make it. Chaos erupted. Director Han sprinted away. Luke stumbled after him, his face ashen. I leaned back against the wall, my legs weak but not a single trace of regret in my heart. In the end, due to Wendy Lin's surgical error, the patient suffered massive blood loss and died during the emergency resuscitation. The incident caused a huge stir in the hospital. The patient's family raised hell, and the media seized on the scandal. 3 days later, the disciplinary decisions were made public. Wendy Lynn's medical license was revoked. She was demoted to a nurse. Luke Carter received an official military reprimand for interfering with hospital arrangements. As for me, having completed a complex, high-risk surgery successfully, not only did I retain my placement at the military district hospital, but I was also fast-tracked for promotion to Deputy Director of Surgery. Standing in front of the hospital bulletin board, I read Wendy Lynn's name printed on the disciplinary notice. But the satisfaction I'd imagined wasn't there, because this victory had come at the cost of someone's life. The thought twisted in my gut. It wasn't your fault. I turned to find Director Hahn standing behind me, his gaze heavy with complicated emotions. I know, I replied quietly, but still, some things, once they begin, there's no turning back. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Dr. Shen, the official transfer order for the military district hospital will be issued Monday. Start preparing. As I watched Director Hahn walk away, I suddenly realized this was only the beginning of my revenge. Wendy Lynn and Luke Carter would never stop so easily. At the corner, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure, Wendy. She was in her nurse's uniform, her eyes burning with hatred as she stared at me with intense fury. I didn't back down. I met her gaze with cold confidence and allowed a mocking smile to tug at the corner of my lips. The game had only just begun, my dear sweet sister. After a full week of intense work, I was completely exhausted. As dusk fell, I rubbed my aching shoulders and stepped out of the hospital. The setting sun stretched my shadow long across the pavement. Since Wendy's demotion, the gossip around the hospital had quieted, but the stares, sharp and prying, were more noticeable than ever. Emily Shen. That voice made my skin crawl. Luke Carter stormed toward me from beside his military jeep at the hospital entrance. His uniform was neatly pressed, and the scratches on his face had started to scab over, making him look even more vicious. He grabbed my wrist roughly, and I frowned from the pressure. "What the hell do you want?" he growled, his voice low and threatening. "If you're not going to give Wendy the placement, then don't even think about marrying me." I almost laughed out loud. Even now, at this point, he still believed I'd be blindly devoted to him, like I was in my past life. "Luke Carter," I said slowly as I pulled my hand away, clearly enunciating every word. "Are you mentally ill? When did I ever say I wanted to marry you?" He froze, clearly stunned by how directly I had rejected him. The sunlight illuminated the side of his face, making the claw marks I had left stand out even more. That had been the first gift I gave him after my rebirth. His expression darkened. "Don't think that by doing this you can get my attention. This is your last chance. Give the military district hospital spot to Wendy. Or else." "Or else what?" I interrupted, stepping forward. "You'll frame me again? Falsely accuse me of sabotaging a military marriage and throw me into prison?" His pupils constricted, his face turned pale. What are you talking about?" Watching his panic, a wave of satisfaction rose in my chest. In the last life, that's exactly how he destroyed me, with a fabricated charge. And now, hearing it from my mouth, he was completely thrown off. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said with a cold smirk. "Now step aside. I'm going home." "She doesn't need to marry you," a deep, cool voice suddenly came from behind. I turned and found myself staring into a pair of eyes dark as ink. A man stood there in a perfectly tailored military uniform. Broad shoulders, long legs, easily over 6 feet tall. The sunset cast a golden glow on his sharp features and lean frame. His brow was slightly prominent, his gaze deep and piercing. The faint scar above his left brow added a subtle edge to his otherwise refined appearance. Though he stood at the bottom of the steps, his presence was commanding, as if he was towering over everyone. The sunlight framed him in gold, and for a moment, even the dust in the air seemed to pause for him. "Captain Ryan Gu." Luke's voice dropped an octave. The arrogance from before vanished completely. He unconsciously straightened his posture. Ryan gave him a glance, cold, indifferent, as if he were nothing more than a pebble on the sidewalk. Then he climbed the steps and came to stand beside me. He smelled faintly of pine and sunlight. It was a calm, reassuring scent that made me feel strangely at ease. "Because she's all ready." He paused, the corner of his lips lifting slightly into a smile that could make any woman's heart skip a beat. Married to me. That sentence hit me like a thunderclap. My eyes widened. I was completely stunned. Who was this man? When did I marry him? Luke's face turned ghostly pale. His lips trembled. This is impossible. We just got our marriage certificate yesterday, the man said calmly, pulling a small red booklet from the pocket of his uniform. He waved it casually in front of Luke Carter. Would you like to inspect it, Captain Carter? Luke stood frozen, as if struck by lightning, disbelief flooding his eyes. He looked at me, then back at the man, before suddenly snatching the certificate and flipping it open. I leaned in quickly to get a look. There it was, a marriage certificate with a photo of me and this unfamiliar man. The official stamp of the Civil Affairs Bureau gleamed in red ink. In the photo, I was wearing a white blouse and smiling gently. He looked serious, but his eyes were soft and warm. The problem was, I had no memory of ever taking that photo. This is fake, Luke roared. His forehead veins bulged with anger. Emily Shen, you forged a marriage certificate. To be honest, I was wondering the same thing. But before I could say a word, the man beside me calmly took the booklet back and chuckled. Falsely accusing the spouse of a military officer. Do you need me to remind you what the punishment is for that, Captain Carter? Luke's arrogance immediately deflated. But the fury in his eyes only grew more intense. Ryan Gu, he snapped, his voice hoarse. You knew full well that she was engaged to me. An engagement? Ryan raised an eyebrow. As far as I know, Dr. Shen never agreed to your proposal. He took a step forward and his tone dropped, cold and sharp. In fact, it's you who repeatedly harassed my wife over another woman. Should we talk about how that should be dealt with? Wife. My ears turned hot. I could feel my face burning. Who was this man, really? Why was he helping me? And more importantly, how the hell did he get a marriage certificate that looked so real? Luke's face turned from pale to green, his fists clenched tight, knuckles cracking. But he didn't dare move. Ryan Gu clearly outranked him. In a military hierarchy as strict as ours, that alone was enough to keep Luke in check. Emily Shen. Luke gritted my name through his teeth, eyes filled with rage. You think this is enough to get rid of me? Without a word, Ryan stepped forward, positioning himself between me and Luke, shielding me. Captain Carter, watch your words. If you try this again, I'll report directly to your commanding officer. That sentence broke what little resolve Luke had left. He gave me one last hateful glare, then spun around and marched away. The hem of his uniform snapped through the air in a wide, angry arc. Only when the sound of his Jeep's engine faded into the distance did I finally exhale. I turned to face the man beside me, this mysterious husband. Now, are you going to explain what the hell is going on? Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a moment to study me. His gaze was intense and focused, so much so that it made me a little uncomfortable. The setting sun painted a golden edge across his lashes, casting delicate shadows beneath his eyes. The scar above his brow was more visible up close, and for some reason, it reminded me of a wild hawk. Let's get in the car first, he finally said. His voice was softer now, calmer. This isn't the place for that conversation. I hesitated, but curiosity eventually won out over caution. I followed him to a military jeep parked by the curb. He opened the door for me, like a proper gentleman. The interior was tidy, with a file folder and a couple of military journals on the back seat. Ryan started the engine smoothly and pulled into traffic. The city scenery gradually faded into the outskirts as the sun dyed the sky a deep orange red. Where are you taking me? I couldn't hold back the question anymore. To my mentor's house, he said plainly, eyes still on the road. He asked me to bring you home for dinner. Mentor? I blinked, confused. Who? He glanced at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of emotion, something tightly held back. Professor Shen, your father. My mind raced. A student of my father's? I searched my memory and suddenly recalled that my father often spoke fondly of a particularly outstanding student, how intelligent and promising he was. Eventually, he had joined the military, and that student was Ryan Gu. Could it really be him? Cautiously, I asked, so that marriage certificate, was it fake? It was, he answered without hesitation. I did it to help you get rid of Luke Carter. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, but for some strange reason, I also felt a flicker of disappointment. It didn't make sense. Was I hoping it was real? Why did you help me? I looked straight at his profile. We don't even know each other. The corners of Ryan Gu's lips curved ever so slightly. Who says we don't? The car turned onto a road I instantly recognized. It led to my parents' house. Ryan slowed down and finally turned his head to look at me. 10 years ago, under the pear tree in your backyard, a little girl gave me 2 meat buns and said, "Big brother, you should eat more if you want to grow taller." The gate of memory burst open. I remembered. I had been 14 that year. My father had brought home a frail teenage boy and told me he was a student he was sponsoring. Orphaned, dirt poor. That boy always sat quietly in the corner reading. That was you? I gasped. You called me small and skinny? He said with a soft laugh. The army's a good place. It toughens people up. I stared at his chiseled features in disbelief, trying to find traces of the silent boy he once was. It was hard to imagine that time had turned that shy, skinny bookworm into the commanding officer sitting beside me now. So the marriage certificate? I began. Director Hahn helped with that, he replied calmly. He and your father were old comrades. When he heard Luke Carter was harassing you at the hospital, your father called me. That explained why Director Hahn had suddenly changed his attitude toward me. Realizing how much my father had done for me behind the scenes made my chest tighten. My eyes burned with the threat of tears. The car pulled up in front of my parents' courtyard. Ryan turned off the engine but didn't get out right away. He turned to me instead. If we're going to act, he said, we're going to do it right. In front of Luke Carter, we have to play the part of a real married couple, at least until your transfer to the military district hospital goes through. His gaze was too intense, and I had to look away. Why are you going this far to help me? Silence filled the car. After a long pause, I finally heard him say softly, call it repaying a debt for those 2 meat buns. That answer made me laugh. He smiled too, and in that moment, even the scar above his brow seemed softer. Come on, he said, opening the car door. Your parents are probably waiting. As soon as I stepped out, I saw my mother standing at the gate, a knowing smile on her face. My father was sitting under the great arbor, pretending to read the newspaper, though his eyes kept glancing our way. Ryan, you're here. My mom came over enthusiastically, her eyes bouncing between the two of us with obvious delight. Come in, dinner's ready. Ryan nodded politely. Ma'am. Then, like magic, he pulled 2 gift boxes from the back seat, just a small token of appreciation. My mom beamed, grabbing his arm and practically dragging him inside, completely ignoring her own daughter in the process. Only then did my dad finally put down the newspaper and walk over. In a low voice, he asked, So, what do you think? Satisfied? I looked at him, half laughing, half crying. Dad, what are you 2 even doing? He patted my shoulder, a proud sparkle in his eyes. Didn't you always say when you were little that you'd marry your brother Ryan? My face instantly flushed. That was just childish nonsense. He let out a hearty laugh and draped an arm over my shoulder. Come on, your mom made braised pork, Ryan's favorite. When we entered the house, I saw Ryan helping my mom set the table. His movements were smooth, practiced, like he'd done it 100 times before. The setting sun filtered through the windows, lighting up the insignia on his uniform shoulder, making it gleam. Just who exactly was this man who'd suddenly entered my life? And where would this fake marriage take us? At the dinner table, my mom kept piling food into Ryan's bowl like he was her actual son-in-law. My dad, meanwhile, was enthusiastically discussing the transfer details for the military district hospital, as if everything had already been finalized. Then Ryan suddenly turned to me. Emily, he said. His voice was low and warm. Try this. You used to love it when you were little. As he spoke, he placed a piece of sweet and sour spare rib into my bowl. The motion was so natural, so intimate, that for a moment it felt like we really were a couple who had spent years side by side. I stared at him stunned and suddenly realized this man might know me better than I had imagined, and that realization was both strangely comforting and faintly dangerous. The morning sunlight filtered through the gap in the curtains. I opened my eyes and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling for a few seconds before remembering that I was in the guest room at my parents' house. After that awkward family dinner last night, my mother had insisted I stay the night. Ryan Gu, on the other hand, had claimed he had something urgent to handle with the unit and left early. I rubbed my temples as fragments of last night's conversation replayed in my head. Ryan was my father's student from 10 years ago, and now the commander of a special forces unit. His knowledge of my past was staggering. He remembered the food I liked, my most embarrassing childhood stories, and even that blue summer dress I wore when I was 14. "Emily, are you up?" My mom knocked softly at the door. "Ryan's here?" I shot upright so fast I almost strained my neck. "This early?" A glance at the clock confirmed it was barely 7 a.m. After a quick wash, I changed into the pale yellow dress my mom had laid out and tied my hair back into a simple ponytail. The girl in the mirror had light circles under her eyes. I clearly hadn't slept well. As I made my way downstairs, I heard low voices and soft laughter coming from the kitchen. Ryan, dressed in a plain white shirt and black slacks, was helping my mom fry eggs. Sunlight streamed through the windows, outlining the broad shoulders and narrow waist beneath his casual clothes. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder with a soft smile. "Do you like your eggs fully cooked or runny?" The casual familiarity in his voice made my ears burn. "Fully cooked," I replied in a small voice, avoiding his gaze as I sat down at the table. My dad was behind the newspaper, peering at me over the rim of his reading glasses with a meaningful look. My mom, glowing with satisfaction, slid a plate of golden, crispy eggs in front of me. "Ryan's quite the cook," she said cheerfully. "You flatter me, ma'am," Ryan said with a modest smile that even softened the scar on his brow. Breakfast passed in an oddly harmonious atmosphere. Ryan chatted naturally with my dad about recent military affairs, and from time to time, he would turn to ask me about the hospital. He was so composed, so present, that it truly felt like we were a real family. "I need to head to the hospital," I said, putting down my chopsticks and breaking the illusion. "I haven't finished documenting yesterday's surgery." "I'll drive you," Ryan said immediately, his tone leaving no room for refusal. The ride was silent. Ryan focused on the road, while I pretended to be fascinated by the passing scenery. When we finally pulled up in front of the hospital, he spoke. "Luke Carter might try something," he said calmly, though I noticed how his fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "If anything happens, call me right away." I turned to him. "You know something? He went to see Wendy Lynn last night and stayed late," and Ryan's eyes sharpened. "He's been digging into my background lately." My chest tightened. Luke wasn't the kind to back down easily. In my previous life, he'd slowly forced me into a corner, step by calculated step, never stopping until he got what he wanted. "Why are you helping me like this?" I asked again, unable to hold back. "It can't just be about 2 meat buns." Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then he reached up and unfastened the top 2 buttons of his shirt, pulling out a thin silver chain from beneath his collar. Hanging from it was a small, slightly deformed bullet casing. "Recognize this?" I shook my head. "When I was 15, he began, voice soft, like recounting a story from long ago, "I got cornered by a bunch of punks on my way home from school. They took my bag, my lunch money, and said they were going to teach this bookworm a lesson." My heart clenched. "Then," he continued, his lips curling into a small smile, "a girl with a ponytail came charging in with a metal rod, shouting that she'd already called the police. In reality, I hadn't called the police at all. But those punks got scared and ran off anyway." The gates of memory suddenly swung open. I remembered it now. It had really happened. That day, I took a shortcut home and happened to see a group of delinquent boys bullying a scrawny kid. Without thinking, I picked up a metal pipe lying around a nearby construction site and charged at them, never even considered the consequences. "That boy, was you?" I asked. Ryan nodded and tucked the bullet casing back beneath his shirt collar. "Later, when I joined the army, during my first mission, this bullet nearly ended my life." He lightly patted his chest. "But it hit my dog tag instead and saved me." I didn't know what to say. I could only sit there, staring at him blankly. "So, Emily Shen." He leaned in suddenly, close enough that I could smell the faint pine scent clinging to him. "Do you still wonder why I'm helping you?" My heart skipped a beat, my cheeks flushed with heat. Before I could respond, someone knocked on the car window. We both turned our heads. It was Director Han, standing outside with a stern expression. "There's a problem," he said as soon as I opened the door. Wendy Lin just submitted a formal complaint this morning, accusing you of forging a marriage certificate to fraudulently obtain the surgical slot at the military hospital. I felt the blood drain from my face. Ryan, however, stayed calm. Where did she send the complaint? To the Department of Health and the Political Division of the Military Region, Director Han said with a frown. Obviously, Luke Carter is pushing this from behind the scenes. Ryan let out a cold chuckle and pulled out his phone. Joe, it's me. Check if the health department received a complaint today. Yes, about me. He paused for a second. If you can't squash it directly, just say it involves military classified information. Then he hung up and nodded at Director Han. Please take Emily inside first. I'll take care of the rest. Director Han opened his mouth as if to say something, but sighed instead. You little punk, fine. Let's go, Dr. Shen. The entire day at the hospital carried a strange, tense atmosphere. The nurses looked at me with curiosity. A few doctors who had been close with Wendy Lin clearly avoided me. Wendy herself was nowhere to be seen. Apparently, she had called in sick. During afternoon rounds, Nurse Zhang quietly told me, Wendy was picked up early this morning by Officer Luke. They went to the military district. My stomach dropped. Luke Carter was clearly determined to escalate this to the highest level. Just before the end of my shift, my pager buzzed. One line of text flashed across the screen: emergency entrance. Now, G. I rushed to the ER doors and saw Ryan's military SUV parked outside. He stepped out and opened the door for me, his expression grave. Luke got someone from the military disciplinary committee involved, he said as I stepped in. What? My knees nearly buckled. Don't panic. He caught me by the arm, his grip firm, yet gentle. Get in, we'll talk. Once inside, Ryan handed me a document folder. Open it, he said. Inside was a legally registered marriage certificate, dated 3 days ago. Along with it were several photos of us in various settings, sitting on a park bench smiling at each other, raising glasses in a restaurant, and even one where I was asleep on his shoulder. I was too stunned to speak. I had it all prepared, Ryan said calmly. If we're going to act, we go all in. But they're all fake, I said, panic rising in my throat. If they find out, who said they're fake? He interrupted, pulling out a simple silver ring from his pocket. Yesterday afternoon, with your father and Director Han as witnesses, we legally registered the marriage. It was like being struck by lightning. My brain went blank. Just like that, he had arranged my entire life. Sensing my shock, Ryan's voice softened. It's just a temporary solution. Once this is over, if you want out, we can divorce anytime. He handed me the ring. But for now, we need to take a few post-marriage photos in case there's an investigation. And just like that, I found myself dazed and confused, following Ryan to the farmer's market. I watched as he picked vegetables with practiced ease. Then we went to the movie theater, pretending to cuddle in the dark. We even ended up at a furniture store, discussing mattress firmness like every newlywed couple. The entire experience felt surreal, like walking through a dream. Ryan played the part flawlessly. He would naturally place a hand on my shoulder when we crossed the street, catch my hand if I missed a step on the stairs, and even remembered that I hated cilantro, reminding the waiter not to add any. This careful, thoughtful treatment felt so unfamiliar. It made me want more, yet it also scared me. By early evening, he dropped me off at my parents' house. But instead of letting me out immediately, he turned toward me, his expression serious. There's something you need to know, he said. Luke Carter isn't just going after you because of jealousy. What do you mean? I asked. Wendy Lin's father is the deputy director of logistics in the military region, Ryan said in a low voice. The surgical slot at the military hospital was originally meant for his daughter. I sucked in a breath. So that's why. In my previous life, it had been so easy for me to give up the spot, because it had been planned from the beginning. All of it. So, this won't be easy, Ryan continued, gently taking my hand. His palm was warm and dry. But don't worry, I'm here. That simple promise for some reason made my eyes sting. Just then, his phone rang. As he answered, his expression grew increasingly serious. Got it, I'll be there right away. He hung up and looked at me apologetically. Something urgent came up at the base. I have to go. I nodded and reached for the door, but he suddenly caught my wrist. Wait. He leaned in and gently kissed my forehead. We're playing the part, remember? he said quietly, his breath brushing across my cheek. That unexpected moment of intimacy made my heart race like mad. It wasn't until his car turned the corner and disappeared from view that I finally came back to my senses. I touched my forehead, still feeling the lingering warmth, completely overwhelmed. As soon as I walked in, my mom greeted me with a mysterious smile. "So how was it? Getting along with Ryan?" "Mom," I protested, flustered. "It's just a fake marriage." "Fake marriage?" My dad poked his head out from the study, pushing his reading glasses up his nose. "Who said it's fake? The marriage certificate is real. The witnesses were real, and he even prepared the bride price." I felt like lightning had struck me. "What bride price?" My mom beamed and pulled me toward the living room. On the coffee table sat a carved rosewood box. Inside was a pair of crystal-clear jade bangles. "These have been in the Gu family for generations," my dad said solemnly. "Ryan is serious about this." I stared at the bangles, a sinking realization hitting me. Maybe I'd fallen into something much, much deeper than I ever expected. Ryan Gu, this man who'd suddenly stormed into my life, just how many more secrets was he hiding? And more terrifyingly, I found myself wondering, was I starting to hope this fake marriage might actually become real? A week of constant rain had soaked the city in a heavy dampness. I stood by the hospital corridor window, watching raindrops snake down the glass. My fingers absent-mindedly brushed against the silver ring on my left ring finger. This prop that Ryan had given me, which had somehow become a part of my everyday life. "Dr. Shen, the patient in bed 3 says her wound hurts," a nurse called, pulling me out of my thoughts. I nodded and followed him into the room. Since Wendy Lin had been demoted to nurse, the hospital's atmosphere had taken a subtle turn. On the surface, everyone treated me with more respect, but the averted eyes and sudden silences in conversations reminded me that the storm was far from over. After finishing rounds, I was reviewing patient notes when someone placed a steaming cup of tea in front of me. I looked up and saw Director Han's serious face. "Be careful these days," he said quietly. "Wendy Lin is back." My fingers froze mid-sentence. My pen streaked across the patient chart in a dark ink smear. "When did this happen?" "This morning," Director Han replied with a deep frown. "Luke Carter personally brought her in. He even made a point to stop by HR. I gave a cold laugh. Looks like Luke Carter is determined to back her no matter what. I was about to say more when a commotion suddenly erupted at the end of the corridor. A few nurses came running toward us in panic. "Director, something happened in the ER. Nurse Lin fainted." Director Han and I exchanged a glance before rising at the same time. The ER was already crowded with people. Through the gap between the staff, I saw Wendy Lin lying pale and unconscious on a stretcher. Luke Carter was kneeling beside her, gripping her hand tightly. "Make way! Doctor coming through!" someone shouted. The crowd parted to form a path. I walked through, instinct kicking in as I approached to check her condition. Her face was colorless, forehead slick with sweat, one hand clutching her lower abdomen. "She's pregnant," Luke suddenly said, eyes burning with fury as he looked up at me. "Emily Shen, this is all your fault." His words hit like a bomb, sending a shockwave through the ER. All eyes turned to me, some surprised, others suspicious, and some watching gleefully like spectators to a scandal. I calmly put on my gloves. "Move. I need to examine her." "You're not touching her," Luke roared like a lion provoked. "You pushed her last week." "Lieutenant Carter," I interrupted him. "This is a hospital. If you really care about her, stop getting in the doctor's way." Director Han stepped forward. "Officer Carter, please cooperate." Luke, clearly reluctant, moved aside, though the anger in his eyes didn't diminish one bit. I quickly performed a preliminary check. Her blood pressure was low, heart rate elevated, but there were no signs of visible abdominal trauma or bleeding. "We'll need to do an ultrasound to confirm," I told the nurse. Then I turned to Luke. "When did she get pregnant? How far along is she? When was her last menstrual period?" The flurry of professional questions made him stammer. His face turned a deep shade of red. Before he could answer, Wendy stirred and weakly grabbed his hand. "Luke, our baby." That sentence was like pouring ice water into hot oil. The entire ER exploded into murmurs. Luke Carter and Wendy Lin, having a child together? It was enough to confirm everything. Their inappropriate relationship was no longer speculation. I swallowed my rising disgust and kept my voice steady. Nurse Lynn, please cooperate with the exam. If there are signs of a miscarriage, we'll need to treat it immediately. A flash of panic passed through Wendy's eyes, but she quickly reverted to her fragile, pitiful look. Emily, I know you hate me, but the baby is innocent. Well played. A retreat disguised as kindness. I almost wanted to applaud her acting. Emily Shen, Luke shouted. If anything happens to Wendy or the baby, I swear I won't let you off. Lieutenant Carter, I said slowly, removing my gloves. First of all, I never laid a finger on Nurse Lynn last week. Second, if she truly is pregnant and showing miscarriage symptoms, as a doctor, I would be the first person hoping for her safe recovery. I looked around the room to make sure everyone heard me clearly. Lastly, your personal relationship with her isn't mine to comment on. The murmurs around us grew louder. Luke's face shifted from red to pale green as the weight of his own outburst dawned on him. Wendy clenched the bedsheet, a flicker of resentment flashing through her eyes. Prep the ultrasound room, I instructed the nurse. Then I leaned down and whispered near Wendy's ear, just loud enough for her alone to hear. Careful, sister. Your performance is starting to get a little over the top. Her pupils constricted sharply. The results of the ultrasound came back exactly as I expected. No signs of pregnancy. When I returned to the ER with the report in hand, Luke Carter and Wendy Lynn were arguing with Director Hahn about something. I didn't bother waiting. The test results are clear, I interrupted, raising the ultrasound sheet. There are no signs of pregnancy, no bleeding or damage inside the uterus either. That's impossible, Wendy screamed, completely forgetting to maintain her usual fragile and innocent persona. Clearly what? I raised an eyebrow. Clearly bought a fake positive pregnancy test? Or clearly planned this whole stunt with Luke Carter? Luke's face turned ashen. Emily Shen, you're slandering her. Slandering? I let out a cold laugh, pulling a folded paper from the pocket of my white coat. Then why don't you explain this? I unfolded the sheet. It was a gynecology report dated 3 days ago, clearly stating that the patient was not pregnant. The best part? Wendy Lynn's signature was right there in the lower right corner. That's not possible. Wendy's face was as pale as a corpse. I never went to the military district hospital. I helped fill in the blanks for her, I said calmly. Too bad the nurse at the front desk has a particularly sharp memory, especially when it comes to patients who cut the line and insult staff. The ER fell completely silent. Everyone stood frozen, stunned by the sudden turn of events. Luke looked like he'd been smacked in the face. Slowly, he turned to Wendy. You lied to me? No, Luke. Wendy panicked, tears spilling from her eyes. Emily set me up. She framed me. Enough. Luke roared, violently yanking his hand away from hers. After everything I've done for you. How could you? What have you done for me, huh? I could list a few things, I said calmly. Abuse of authority, misleading coworkers, or should I draw this out? I paused for effect. Leaking military secrets? Those 4 words hit like a grenade. Even Wendy's sobs came to an abrupt halt. A flicker of fear appeared in Luke's eyes. You're making that up? Am I? I glanced at my watch and said meaningfully, Oh, right. Ryan Gu is attending a military district meeting today. You knew that, didn't you? Luke's face instantly turned ghostly white. He shoved through the crowd and bolted out of the ER without even glancing back, completely ignoring Wendy's cries for him to stop. Well, the show's over, Director Hahn finally said. Nurse Lynn, I expect a full explanation about this fake pregnancy stunt. Wendy collapsed on the hospital bed, her makeup ruined by tears. Gone was the innocent little flower routine, replaced by a face full of resentment and defeat. She glared at me with bloodshot eyes. Don't get cocky, Emily Shen. Luke won't let you off the hook. I leaned in and whispered next to her ear, then let's see who ends up letting go of whom. Stepping out of the ER, I let out a long breath and realized my back was soaked with sweat. We'd won this round, but my hands were still trembling from the aftermath. The moment I got back to my office, my phone buzzed. A message from Ryan Gu popped up. Plan successful. He's taken the bait. Picking you up for dinner to celebrate tonight. I stared at the message, and before I could stop myself, the corners of my lips curled upward. 3 days ago, when Ryan told me about this plan, I wasn't fully convinced. But everything had unfolded exactly as he predicted. Wendy would fake a pregnancy to frame me, and Luke would panic and expose their affair. Even better, Ryan had arranged for someone to monitor Wendy's every move, including retrieving her gynecological exam record from the military hospital. And that subtle threat about leaking military secrets? That was just the other trap we had set for Luke. By the time I finished my shift, the rain had finally stopped. I stepped out the hospital doors and immediately spotted Ryan's military SUV parked down the street. He stood beside it in uniform, relaxed against the car, bathed in the golden light of sunset. As soon as he saw me, he straightened up. The corners of his lips curved into a small smile, and that smile made my heart skip a beat. Over the past month, this man who had so suddenly entered my life had gone from being a fake husband to becoming the ally I trusted most. And after today's beautiful reversal, I'd gotten a real glimpse of just how sharp and calculated he could be. "Congratulations, Mrs. Gu," Ryan said as he opened the car door for me, his voice laced with warmth. "Victory in your first battle." "All thanks to Colonel Gu's brilliant strategy," I replied half-jokingly as I got into the car. He walked around to the driver's side, but didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. "What's coming next will be more dangerous. Luke Carter has his back against the wall now. He's capable of doing anything." "I know," I nodded, "but right now, I'm guessing he's more worried about the military secret you hinted at." Ryan let out a low laugh and started the car. "That was just the shadow. The real trap comes later." He didn't elaborate, but the cold glint in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Luke Carter's good days were numbered. As the car drove into the deepening dusk, I stared out the window at the city lights slowly coming to life, then suddenly remembered something. "By the way, how did you know Wendy Lynn would fake a pregnancy?" Ryan smiled meaningfully. "Because she really did buy a pregnancy test last week." My eyes widened. "Then that ultrasound report from the military hospital? Sometimes there can be alternate versions of a document," he said casually, like he was talking about the weather. That answer made my stomach drop. Ryan's tactics were even more ruthless than I had imagined. Sensing my unease, he reached over and gently took my hand. "Don't worry, I only do this to the enemy." His hand was warm and steady. Somehow it calmed me. In a world where the weak were prey to the strong, if I hadn't had someone like Ryan Gu by my side, Luke Carter and Wendy Lynn would have chewed me down to the bone. "Where are we going now?" I asked. "To meet someone," he said mysteriously. "He's going to help you deal with Luke Carter once and for all." "Who?" "One of my father's old subordinates. He's now the discipline committee secretary for the military district." My heart skipped. So Ryan was ready to go all in. Luke Carter probably never imagined that the person he messed with wasn't just a woman reborn for revenge, but also a special forces commander who would do anything to protect his wife. The military SUV drove through the night toward the district headquarters. I didn't know what exactly was waiting for us there, but one thing was certain: this revenge drama was just beginning to reach its climax. The meeting with the military district's disciplinary committee went more smoothly than I expected. Ryan's father, the imposing General Gu, maintained a stern face the entire time, but at the crucial moment, he handed me a file. Inside were detailed records of every rule and regulation Luke Carter had violated over the past 2 years, from accepting gifts to abusing his authority. Nothing was omitted. There were even photos of him and Wendy Lynn taken together inside the district dormitory under restricted access. 3 days, the general said firmly as I was leaving, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. 3 days means everything regarding Luke Carter will be handled within that time, Ryan whispered to me. On the drive back into the city, I sat flipping through the evidence in my lap. My fingers were trembling. This file alone was enough to strip Luke Carter of his uniform, maybe even bring him to military court. The man who destroyed my life in my previous existence was finally going to pay for what he did. "Don't overthink it," Ryan said, one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting lightly over mine. "He's only getting what he deserves." I nodded and tucked the file away carefully. Night had fallen. Streetlights cast flowing shadows across the car windows as we drove. Ryan didn't take me back to my parents' house. Instead, he headed for our shared residence inside the military compound, the apartment set up for our marriage performance. It was a modest 2-bedroom unit, simple in layout, but it carried the unmistakable traces of real life. The bookshelf in the living room was lined with military and medical books, and on the dining table sat a bouquet of fresh lilies. "You got these?" I asked, pointing at the flowers. Ryan Gu took off his military jacket and hung it neatly on the coat rack by the door. "Yeah. Thought you might like them." That small gesture sent a faint ripple through my heart. Over the past month, this man, stern and composed on the surface, had constantly surprised me with moments of quiet tenderness that softened all his sharp edges. "I'll make some tea," he said, heading toward the kitchen. His tall figure stood straight, his back firm and calm like a pine tree. I sat on the sofa, letting my eyes drift over this space that was now filled with traces of him. A photo frame on the coffee table caught my attention. It was a picture from our wedding day. In it, he stood tall and proud, the corners of his lips slightly upturned. I looked a little stiff, leaning cautiously beside him. To anyone else, we looked like a genuinely happy newlywed couple. "I added some honey," Ryan said as he returned with 2 cups of tea and sat beside me. The calming aroma of the tea gently filled the space. We sat quietly, not saying a word. Suddenly his phone rang, breaking the silence. He answered it, and as the call went on, his expression grew more and more serious. "Got it. Keep watching," he said before ending the call. Then he turned to me. "Luke Carter's making a move." I tightened my grip on the teacup. "What kind of move?" "He's meeting with some local thugs tonight at the Red Rose Club," Ryan said, his eyes narrowing. My guys heard them mention my name. A chill crept up my spine. The Red Rose Club was one of the city's most infamous nightclubs, a place crawling with shady characters and surrounded by trouble. The fact that Luke Carter chose to meet there meant he was definitely up to no good. "What's he planning?" I asked. Ryan paused and thought. "Most likely to stage some kind of accident. A place like that, full of drunk fights and chaos, even if someone dies, it's easy to cover up." My blood ran cold. In my past life, Luke had used the same kind of schemes to push me closer and closer to ruin. Now he wanted to come after Ryan? "Let's call the police," I blurted, jumping to my feet. "No use," Ryan said calmly, pulling me back down. "Without solid evidence, they won't do anything. Besides..." A cold glint flashed in his eyes. "This is our chance. A chance to lure the snake out of its hole." He grabbed a pen and quickly sketched a rough map on a piece of paper. "If Luke Carter dares to conspire with street thugs to attack an active duty officer, he's digging his own grave." As he continued outlining the plan, piece by piece, I could see the whole thing forming in front of me. Bold, risky, but airtight. My fingers twisted together unconsciously, my heart pounding. This was dangerous, but if it worked, Luke Carter wouldn't have a leg left to stand on. "It's too risky." I shook my head. "What if? Trust me." Ryan took my hand in his, warm and steady. "I'll be fine." His gaze was unshakable, like granite, and somehow it eased the storm inside me. In the end, I nodded. The next morning, Ryan left early, saying he had to make some arrangements with the unit. I went to the hospital as usual, pretending like everything was normal. Rumors about yesterday's drama were already flying all over the hospital. Wendy Lynn had taken an extended leave, reportedly returning to her hometown to recover. Luke Carter had vanished completely. He hadn't even reported to the military district. During lunch, I made a point to casually mention at the nurse station, loud enough for people to hear, that Ryan Gu would be attending a get-together with old comrades at the Red Rose tonight. As expected, a few nurses who used to be close to Wendy immediately perked up their ears. After work, I didn't go home. Instead, I headed to a cafe near the military base. Ryan was already there, waiting for me. Sitting next to him were 2 young men in plain clothes. "This is Zhang and Li," he said simply. "My guys, they'll be tailing you tonight from a distance." The 2 young men gave me a respectful salute, their eyes filled with both curiosity and admiration. It was only then I realized, in their eyes, within the military, I was already officially the captain's wife. "All set?" I asked in a low voice. Ryan nodded. "We've got people inside and outside the club. As soon as Luke Carter shows up, he won't be able to escape." His plan was simple. Let word leak just enough to bait Luke into taking action. The moment his men made a move, Ryan's soldiers, lying in wait, would strike, catching them red-handed. "You need to be careful," I couldn't help but remind him. gripping the strap of my purse tightly. Suddenly, Ryan leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on my forehead. "Wait for me," he said softly. The unexpected intimacy rooted me in place, my ears burning. John and Lee quickly turned their heads, pretending not to see anything. After night fell, I returned to our military district home as planned, but I couldn't sit still. The TV was on, but I didn't hear a single word. The ticking of the clock echoed in the quiet living room, every second dragging out like an eternity. At exactly 10 p.m., the phone rang. I practically lunged for it. "Sis, it's Zhang," came a panicked voice. Something happened. The captain, my heart stopped. What about him? It was an ambush. There were more of them than we expected. The captain, he protected us, and I couldn't hear the rest. My ears were filled with the roar of blood rushing through them. I grabbed my coat and phone and bolted out the door, not even realizing I was still in slippers. The night wind howled as I flagged down a cab, trembling as I blurted out the address for the Red Rose Club. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, clearly startled by my pale face. He ran 2 red lights getting us there. The club entrance was swarmed with people. Police lights flashed in the night. I shoved through the crowd, panic surging through me. Then I saw him. In the center of the dance floor, Ryan was half kneeling, his white shirt soaked with blood. A burly man in black was swinging a steel rod down at him. "Stop!" I screamed, charging forward without thinking. Ryan snapped his head up, eyes widening as soon as he saw me. "Emily, stay back," he shouted. But it was too late. The man's rod shifted toward me. In the blink of an eye, Ryan launched himself like a panther, shoving me out of the way. The steel rod landed squarely on his shoulder with a sickening thud. "Ryan!" I crashed to the floor, helplessly watching him stumble back a step, then recover instantly. With a fierce spinning kick, he knocked the attacker across the room. Only then did I take in the rest of the scene. A dozen thugs lay sprawled across the floor. Zhang and Lee, along with other plainclothes soldiers, were subduing the remaining ones. In a corner, Luke Carter was pinned to the ground by 2 military officers, his face as pale as death. "Arrest them all," Ryan barked, voice sharp and commanding, even as blood poured from his shoulder. What followed felt like a chaotic blur. The police arrived. So did the ambulance. Ryan refused to be taken away until he saw Luke Carter shoved into the back of a police cruiser. "He's finished," Ryan muttered near my ear, his breath shaky from pain. "Colluding with gang members to attack a military officer. He's looking at least 10 years in a military prison." I helped him onto the ambulance, finally realizing my hands were trembling uncontrollably. The medics cut open his shirt, revealing a gruesome wound stretching from his shoulder to his collarbone, raw and bloody. "It's fine. Just a flesh wound," Ryan tried to reassure me, though sweat covered his forehead. I didn't say a word. I just held his hand tighter. The flashing red lights of the ambulance pierced the night like the wild thumping of my heart. At the hospital, the doctors stitched up Ryan Gu's wound and gave him a tetanus shot. Zhang stayed by his side the whole time, giving a detailed account of everything that had happened. It turned out Luke Carter hadn't just hired thugs. He'd shown up to command them himself. Their original plan had been to stage a drunken bar fight, disguising the attack as an accident. What they hadn't expected was that Ryan had already made arrangements. His team outnumbered theirs. "That bastard even brought a camera," Zhang said angrily. "He must have planned to photograph the captain getting beat up, probably to use it to threaten you, ma'am." Ryan glanced at him sharply. Zhang immediately fell silent. But it was too late. I had heard everything clearly. Luke Carter hadn't just wanted to hurt Ryan. He wanted to use the photos as blackmail, against me. "I'm going to see him," I said, standing up, my voice cold as ice. Ryan tried to stop me, but the doctor held him down. "The stitches just went in. Don't move around." With police approval, I walked into the interrogation room where Luke was being held. He sat at a steel table, his uniform disheveled and bruises blooming across his face. When he saw me, a glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes. "Emily," he said urgently, "this is all just a misunderstanding. I was just at the club for drinks, and spare me." I cut him off icily. "Your men already confessed. The photos from the camera have been developed." His face drained of color instantly. "Do you even understand what it means to assault a serving officer?" I leaned in, staring into his eyes. And you colluded with civilians. You broke the law knowingly. I can explain. No need. I straightened up, staring down at him. General Gu already knows everything. Want to guess how he'll deal with someone who tried to kill his son? Luke slumped in the chair like his soul had been sucked out of him. His face turned gray, and all the arrogance he once wore had completely disappeared. As I walked out of the interrogation room, I exhaled deeply. It felt like a burden I'd carried for years had finally been lifted. The man who had destroyed my past life had now been consumed by the very trap he set. When I returned to the hospital room, Ryan was fast asleep. The IV dripped steadily into his arm. His long lashes cast soft shadows on his pale face. I quietly held the hand that wasn't injured, and a terrifying thought hit me. I couldn't even imagine what I would have done if something had happened to him tonight. I gripped his hand tighter. "You should go home and rest, ma'am," Zhang whispered. "I'll stay here with the captain." I shook my head. "I'm staying." Zhang looked like he wanted to say more, but in the end he simply nodded and left quietly. The night deepened. The only sound in the room was the steady beeping of the monitor. I stared at Ryan's sleeping face, remembering what he'd said to me in the car the day we registered our marriage. Let's just call it repayment for those 2 meat buns. Now it was clear. He'd already repaid that debt. So what were we now? Moonlight spilled through the gap in the curtains, casting a soft glow across his chiseled face. I leaned down, almost without thinking, and pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Get well soon," I whispered. "There's still so much I want to tell you." The final chapter was drawing to a close. The military tribunal came faster than anyone expected. Because the case involved the assault of an active duty officer, it was treated as a top priority. On the day of the trial, I sat in the courtroom as a victim's representative. Ryan, still recovering, had been ordered by doctors to stay in the hospital. The courtroom was solemn and imposing, the national emblem above the judge's bench gleaming under the lights. When the bailiffs brought Luke Carter in, I almost didn't recognize him. The once proud young officer, who used to walk tall in his uniform, now hunched with sunken eyes and slumped shoulders. His military badges were gone, his face ashen. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. The presiding judge's voice echoed through the courtroom as he began reading the charges. The defendant, Luke Carter, is charged with abuse of power, accepting bribes, colluding with criminal elements, and the assault of an active duty officer. One charge after another was read aloud in the courtroom. The evidence was overwhelming, but what sealed his fate were the photos. Luke Carter captured on camera at the Red Rose Club, meeting with gang members, and the audio recording of him ordering the attack on Ryan Gu. It was irrefutable. He didn't even have a chance to defend himself. When the court played the recording, his voice rang out clearly. "Beat him to a pulp. Get the pictures. Another 500 for each of you when it's done." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. If Ryan hadn't been prepared, if Zhang and the others hadn't shown up in time, I didn't dare imagine what would have happened. It could have been me lying in that hospital bed. During the final statement phase, Luke suddenly turned to the gallery. His eyes locked onto mine, voice hoarse and trembling. "Emily, I know I was wrong. For the sake of what we used to." "Defendant, maintain courtroom decorum," the judge cut in sharply. I rose to my feet. Under the weight of every gaze in the room, I calmly said, "Your Honor, I have no relationship with the defendant. Please proceed with the sentence according to the law." Luke's face turned ghostly pale, like the final lifeline had been yanked from his grasp. After a short recess, the judge returned to deliver the verdict. Luke Carter is hereby sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment, 3 years of political disqualification, and dishonorably discharged from the military. 10 years. The number echoed in my mind. It was the same amount of time I had spent in prison in my previous life, ruined by him. And now it was being handed right back to him, intact and merciless. As I walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight was so bright I had to squint. A swarm of reporters rushed forward, microphones nearly jabbing me in the face. "Dr. Shen, as a victim's representative, are you satisfied with the verdict? Can you tell us how you met Captain Gu? Is it true you and Luke Carter were once romantically involved?" "No comment," I said flatly, pushing past them and hurrying toward the military vehicle parked at the curb. Jang stood by the car. The moment he saw me, he opened the door. "Ma'am, Captain Gu asked me to bring you to the hospital." In the car, Jang kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "The captain also said, if you're tired, you can rest at home first." "To the hospital," I replied briefly, turning to look out the window. The city blurred past. The case was over. Justice had been served. But instead of feeling relief, I was struck by a strange emptiness. The smell of disinfectant greeted me the moment I stepped into the hospital corridor. I pushed open the door to Ryan's room and saw him leaning against the headboard, reviewing documents. The bandages on his shoulder were barely visible beneath his hospital gown. The moment he saw me, he set the papers aside. Concern flickered in his eyes. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. I just walked over, sat beside him, and buried myself in his chest. He froze for a second, then gently wrapped his uninjured arm around me. 10 years, I murmured into his chest. "I've waited 10 years for this." Ryan rested his chin against the top of my head. He got exactly what he deserved. Yes, justice had been done. In my past life, Luke Carter had destroyed me. Now he was being crushed by the consequences of his own actions. So why didn't I feel the satisfaction I'd expected? Sensing my inner turmoil, Ryan gently lifted my chin. "What is it?" "I don't know," I whispered, shaking my head. "I thought I'd feel happier." He paused, then suddenly asked, "Do you still love him?" "What?" My head snapped up. I stared at him in disbelief. "How could you even think that? I can't hate him enough." "Good," he said, his expression softening. He brushed his thumb across the corner of my eye. "I just needed to make sure you wouldn't go soft on him." "Never," I said firmly. "Not for him." I grasped his hand, grounding myself in the warmth of his touch. "Ryan, if it weren't for you." "There's no if," he interrupted gently. His eyes were unwavering. "Everything from now on will be okay." Sunlight streamed through the narrow gap in the curtains, scattering warm flecks of light across our interlocked hands. In that quiet, glowing moment, I realized something that caught me off guard. Somewhere along the way, this man who had entered my life under the guise of a fake marriage had become an irreplaceable part of it. 3 months later, the official transfer order from the military hospital finally came through. I was appointed Deputy Director of Surgery, an almost unprecedented promotion at the time. Ryan Gu's injury had mostly healed, though a scar still ran across his shoulder. He liked to call it his medal of love, and every time he did, I'd give him a light punch. On moving day, both my parents came to help. My mom clung to Ryan's hand, chatting his ear off like he was her own son. My dad, meanwhile, pulled me aside and quietly handed me a small, old wooden box. "This belonged to your grandmother," he said in a hushed tone. "We plan to give it to you on your wedding day." I opened the box. Inside was a pair of translucent jade bangles, glowing gently in the sunlight. I suddenly remembered the engagement gift Ryan had once given me. Those bangles looked remarkably similar. "Dad? Ryan and I started, unsure how to explain our complicated relationship, but my dad waved me off. "Sweetheart, I've lived long enough to read people well. That kid's heart is in the right place. He truly loves you." I lowered my eyes to the jade in my hands and said nothing. I couldn't argue. I'd seen Ryan's love every day in the smallest, quietest ways. From the glass of warm water he always left on my nightstand each morning, to the hallway light he made sure stayed on for me whenever I worked late. From how he memorized all the foods I disliked, to how a book I'd casually mentioned would magically appear by my bedside the next day. That kind of thoughtful tenderness said more than any grand vow ever could. After we moved into the military hospital dorms, life began to settle into a new rhythm. I busied myself adjusting to the new role, while Ryan often had to travel for missions. But every time he returned, he'd bring me a little gift, sometimes a weirdly shaped rock, sometimes a local cookbook. The whole fake marriage act had long since become irrelevant. But neither of us ever brought up the idea of divorce. That marriage certificate just quietly stayed tucked away in a drawer, as if it had always been real. One night, a year later, Ryan came home early from a mission. I was sprawled over the coffee table, working on a research paper, when I heard the door open. I looked up and saw him standing there in the doorway, dusty from travel, holding a bouquet of wildflowers still wet with dew. You're back early, I said, surprised and delighted, rushing to greet him. He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly knelt down on one knee and pulled a velvet box from his pocket. Emily Shen, he said. A year ago, we started all of this because of a deal. But today, I want to ask you for real. Will you marry me? He opened the box. Inside was a simple diamond ring glowing gently under the room's warm light. I know this is sudden, he said, his voice steady, but every day for the past year, I've become more certain of one thing. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Not as an act, not as a transaction, but as a real, honest-to-God marriage. Will you? I looked into his eyes, so earnest, so serious, and suddenly smiled. Captain Gu, I teased. Is this what they call turning a fake marriage into the real deal? Dead serious, he replied, taking my hand in his. Ever since you handed me that meat bun when you were 14, I knew it was you. So that was it. Every coincidence, every reunion, every act of tenderness, it all traced back to the unwavering affection of a skinny teenage boy who never let go of his feelings. I love the ring, I said, drawing out my words playfully. But what? He asked. I think I like the old silver one better, I grinned, blinking at him. Simple, unpretentious, just like a certain captain who doesn't know how to be romantic. Ryan blinked, then burst out laughing and pulled me into his arms. As you wish, ma'am. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains and spilled across the bed. I opened my eyes to find Ryan Gu already awake, lying on his side with one arm tucked beneath his head, quietly watching me. His gaze was so tender, it felt like it could melt into water. Morning, he murmured, leaning in to place a soft kiss on my forehead. I snuggled into his arms with a contented sigh, then suddenly remembered something. By the way, whatever happened to Wendy Lin? I asked. Ryan's expression dimmed slightly. After she went back to her hometown, she married a widowed butcher. I heard he beats her often. Last winter, their roof collapsed and crushed her leg. Now she makes a living by doing sewing work for others. I was quiet for a long moment. That woman, who had once caused my death in my previous life, had now ended up like this. And yet, the satisfaction I'd imagined I'd feel, it never came. Hatred is a double-edged sword. It wounds others, but it wounds the one who holds it even more. Fortunately, I had let go in time. Let's not talk about her, Ryan said, gently pinching my cheek. It's the weekend. What do you want to eat today? I'll cook. I raised an eyebrow. Last time you tried to make noodles, they turned into mush. This time I promise I won't overcook them, he swore solemnly, then added with a grin, and if I do, we'll just go eat at the mess hall. I laughed out loud. Sunlight fell on our intertwined hands, making the rings on our fingers glint with a quiet brilliance. Later, I became the youngest surgical director in the military district hospital, while Ryan was promoted to brigade commander. We built our home right there in the military compound. On weekends, the yard was always filled with the aromas of home-cooked meals and the sound of cheerful voices. Sometimes, I still remembered the tragic ending of my past life, the cold prison bars, the agony of illness. But more often, I would look at the man sleeping peacefully by my side, rest a hand on the gentle swell of my belly, and feel the tiny life inside me move with joy. Fate had given me a second chance, and this time, I had